So to display the information about the book in our app display books, while we're going to ng4 through that array, we have to set up a way that we can pass the book to our app display books. So let's go ahead and get that started. I'm going to break up app display books a little bit so it is easier to read. And I'm going to add in brackets book equals book. Now, if you remember earlier when we're using those square brackets, that means we are doing property binding. So we're trying to bind to a property of app display books. Now, for that to actually work, we need to make sure that app display books has a property called book. So let's go ahead and open up our app display books.component.html. Or I'm sorry, .ts. So here we are. We're going to first import input from @Angular core. And now that we have this book, we're ready to start making, or I'm sorry, not our book, this input. You guys are going to see what we're going to do with the input here in a second. First, let's set up a public underscore book. And then let's use our input here. So we're going to say @input set book say book in here, set it to any. Now right here, before we finish this off, let's just talk a little bit about what we're doing. @input is another decorator, and right here we're setting up a property called book, not to be confused with our underscore book, but this other book property with this @input means that we can now pass information directly to our display books component by using that book property. And we're creating a set function so that every time this display books component receives the book value, it will fire this function here. So in this function, let's set this ._book equal to book, which we're going to receive as an argument here. Notice we're saying book : any, which means that this book can be of type any. That's a TypeScript feature, not necessarily any part of Angular. So I'll save this, and I'm also going to add a get book or return any. And we'll do return this ._book. So now this display books component will receive a value of book, store that book in _book, and if we want to get that book back out at some point, we can also use this get book, which will return the _book. Cool. So now instead of showing it in a p tag for the book, instead of a p tag, let's open up the HTML here, and we're going to actually try to display it in a card. So let's get rid of this h1. Let's add a div class equals deck. Let's add another div here, class equals card. Notice here, because we're in Angular now, we don't have to use class name or anything like we did when we were doing React, because we're not writing JSX. This is regular old HTML. Class works here perfectly fine. Let's also add a div with a class of container. And in this class, we're going to add an h1. We're going to add an em tag here So that'll make our text emphasized. And in this emphasized text, we will use interpolation and get the value of underscore book dot name of book. I'm going to add another H3 here, use interpolation, and I'm going to get the value of book dot author. At the end of that one, I'm going to add some p tags. For book dot genre. Another one for book dot pub year. And another p tag for book dot rating. Awesome. So now that we have this HTML, let's add some styling to it too, so it'll look a little bit pretty. So in my display books component.css, I'm going to add styling for class deck. Give it a value of display inline block. You'll also notice here, because we're not in React anymore, we don't have to do any kind of strained CSS and JS, because again, we get an HTML file, a CSS file, and a TypeScript file. We get all of this, all these various degrees of separation to keep all of the logic for our components totally separate. Because we're using Angular, we're also going to get something called view encapsulation, which means that by default, these different CSS files for each component will only apply to that component's HTML. You can think of it as being encapsulated. That view is just surrounded, it's kind of isolated, and it's separate. It's all separate until you can make some changes to kind of deviate from that, but it is recommended to keep your view encapsulation just as normal like this. If you have some kind of extra CSS stuff you want to do to apply to the whole thing, use that index.css file again. All right, so for card, we're going to add a box shadow of 0, 0.5 em, 1 em, and give it an RGBA value of 0, 0, 0, 0.2. I'm going to add a transition of 0.3 seconds, a width of 30 view widths, and text align center. I'm also going to add a card hover to give this card a little bit of like a hover state, something just a little bit fancier. So shadow, box shadow, 0.5 em, 0.5 em, 2 em, RGBA, 0, 0, 0, 0.2. I'm also going to add a class here for our card container. Give it padding of 1 em, 2 em. Awesome. So I'll save that. We're going to go check out my display books component again. Maybe I need to make this card container. All right, cool. So let's go see how this app works and functions now. Again, real quick, I just capitalized this C. I think that will match this card container a lot better. But let's go check it out. And I'll minus just in case the styling gets a little funky. So we'll do JavaScript and jQuery. That's by John Duckett. Genre. Nonfiction works, I guess. 2004. And it's a great book. So now I'll add it. And now we get this card here. It has a little bit of a hover thing here. Looks pretty cool. Nice font. It's got all of the information that I want about it. Let me also add my CSS and HTML. Add book. And now I've got them both. And you can really see that hover state now when you have two of them sitting here. Awesome. So that is the conclusion of the first part of our Angular book walkthrough. There will be an assignment posted in probably the general channel for whatever Slack channel you are currently a part of. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you in the next walkthrough.